Morning, Bello.
We'll wait another minute here and then we can get started. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. This is the distribution maintainers call, and today is Tuesday, March 29th. First items on the agenda, we have a couple read-only topics. So please take some time to look through those. These should also be posted over in Slack. I noticed, Mitch, that the last one there, I don't think I saw in Slack. I may have just missed it. But yeah, I think ideally we also are throwing these into the async distribution maintainer Slack call as they come up. Dimitri, you had a topic you wanted to bring up here.
Yeah, because we now have the scripts to provision the OpenShift infrastructure for our needs. The idea was to decommission the OpenShift infrastructure provisioning scripts from the operator repo. Mitch brought up the valid point of like, what do we do with the developers who do want to provision that for themselves? And here lies the question is, do we want to maintain two separate sets of scripts, one for developers and one for ourselves? Or do we want to, like one of the alternatives I offered is perhaps make a mirror of our provisioning repo that is public, that doesn't contain any of the sensitive data? And because the pipeline itself, there's nothing sensitive in the pipeline itself. It's the secrets and everything else and the produced artifacts that we need to guard. In which case, we could make a mirror of that repo and expose it to the end users and point in documentation to that on how to provision the infrastructure or any other combination. I just wanted to see what the group is thinking about that.
Do we have any feel for the demand? Like, do we know folks are using it, or do we just maybe think folks might use it?
So far, what I've seen is people saying, I don't have the time to spin up the OpenShift cluster is what I've seen in tickets. So I don't know if we do know that anybody's using it, but maybe somebody else in the group does.
For the most part, I just have one up whenever I need to specifically test something OpenShift, mostly because it spins up enough nodes that it's a pretty significant cost. You know, typically you try to test in MRs, but it doesn't test every variation of configuration. So it's nice to have a private cluster when you need it. I would love to just use something like a kind equivalent, but as Gerard was testing earlier, it's not always the most feasible option. So public mirror sounds okay, I guess. I mean, if there's nothing public in the project, it's private in the project itself. Can we just make that project public and people can fork it and maintain their own pipelines when they need them?
Well, that's the thing. Currently, we do have like artifacts. I intentionally made the project private so we don't accidentally leak anything that we have, like any logs from the pipelines, any other things. So that was very, very intentional because there is a lot of secrets floating in that project at the runtime. At the runtime, I have to emphasize that. But
So
the
there
code
need
is
some changes to clean it up first, is what I'm hearing.
Well, it was intentional because, like, for now, we're saving the artifacts on how we provisioned the cluster. So the qubit bin secret is stored as artifact for the job until we figure out a better way of doing it. Like, I started the conversation with the security folk on that front as to where to save those secrets. So moving forward, there is a potential that we could move all of those secrets out and have the full project fully open, and that would be fine. To answer Mitch's not exactly concern, but statement that spinning the private clusters, that's exactly what I was doing. I used staging, not staging, the sandbox environment that you can provision for yourself in GKE. And then from there, you just get yourself SA credentials and use that and spin your own private clusters to your device. That's how I was testing it. So you can still use the pipeline to speed things up and get it done asynchronously. Basically, you just launch the pipeline, come back later and see that it's up. But it will be listed as one of the environments that we do have, which may be a good thing. I don't know.
Yeah, and maybe we can just have one team dedicated cluster. I think the main idea of having your own cluster is that you don't touch anything that could affect CI. But if there's one cluster that we leave up that anybody on the team can use and we just namespaces appropriately, maybe that's sufficient. We don't have to worry about maintaining a bunch of different instances and making sure they're spun down, etc.
Yeah, and considering that I'd like to expand this discussion just a touch further out, and that is considering that we are talking about maybe doing similar thing with GKE provisioning, then perhaps GKE cluster provisioning, then perhaps that should be kept in mind. How do we provision the infrastructure for our CI and for our immediate needs, like what you described in Mitch?
I have a question. Will this provisioning area come under the realm of Get down the road? Like 1 year from now, will Get be responsible for provisioning all of this, and will get support for EKS or GK and all of that? So is it possible all of this might be made redundant by Get? Like, do we know if that's a possibility?
I'd say it's a possibility. I haven't heard much discussion on anything kind of beyond supporting the sort of the hybrid model and changes to support Project Horse for Get kind of seem to be the focus at the moment, right? A year from now, that could be different, but in terms of right now, that's my understanding.
My understanding Get was unit focused on getting the GitLab on some remote environment. And in our case, we just need the infrastructure onto which we will be deploying GitLab by our own means sometime later. So that kind of be being at odds with the goals of the project, I think.
So Get has the ability to deploy the environment and install GitLab into it. It's both Terraform and Ansible in many factors. For the sake of spinning up instances for development environments, Get is capable of doing that. For the sake of standing up an infrastructure to be able to deploy GitLab into multiple times as a part of our CI, not quite. I mean, it can, but not really what it's designed to do.
Yeah, that was basically what I was going to say as well. When it comes to the primary focus of this was RCI, which we were kind of handcrafting these instances to then take multiple GitLab review apps. That's not really what Git is focused on. For this project, making it so the CI in all projects have, or in all public projects have the ability to turn off public pipelines. So that means that the pipelines, job details, and artifacts and logs aren't available outside of project members. Is that something we could do instead? Is make the project public, but turn off public pipelines?
Yeah, I'm like I'm trying to be triple secure is in the sense there's no possibility of leak. Like we say some feature introduces leak from the private pipelines, and then accidentally we expose our entire infrastructure, and that will require us to go in defensive mode and try to regenerate all the instances and everything. That would be not good. That's why I kind of opted for fully private. Yeah, the pipelines actually even right now are said to be private in addition to the project being private. So I kind of try to go with the onion approach. Every layer is as secure as possible, just in case we're leaking something, not because of our doing, but because something snuck in. But probably the more appropriate solution to that would be just store secrets someplace else altogether, and then that problem kind of disappears. That's the further down the road thing. That would be the most appropriate solution to this, in my opinion.
Well, thanks everyone for the discussion. The issue is still there and open, so please continue to contribute there. It doesn't seem like we've come to a final conclusion this week on this, but sounds like we're kind of at a stopping point in terms of conversation. So yeah, let's continue this over in that issue. Did anyone have any other topics they wanted to bring up before we just quickly run through some maintainer discussion issues? If not, I can jump through some of the recent and last 2 weeks log maintainer discussion issues. Of course, there's many more than these. The heading title here in the agenda has a link to all of our discussion issues. So please take a look at the whole list when you have time, or maybe not the whole list, but take a look at the link and see if there's something on that list you can contribute to. In terms of ones from the last 2 weeks, there was the one Dimitri just mentioned. I removed it from this section after we started the discussion, which was the decommission OpenShift infrastructure provisioning scripts. Some of the others from the last 2 weeks, one of them is a feature request to open an option to auto create a GitLab API token during the Helm deploy. So please take a look there. That's over in the charts repo. I've left a comment there. Another one is using the CE or EE specified in image tags rather than image, using basically tags to specify whether an image is EE or CE versus using the image names. That is in regards to the CNG repo and log over in charts. And then there is the issue around clarifying the team merge request review prioritization and workflow in terms of what changes and what to show up on the breaching merge request page. So these are all things we can tackle async, but did anyone have any comments on any of these or any questions they wanted to raise during today's call? If not, that's fine. But these are some of the newer ones. Do please take some time to look at these and leave some feedback on these three plus the one that Dimitri was already talking about earlier. With that, we can move on to just a quick summary of merge requests that have merged in the past 2 weeks here. Jason, you have the first merges over in the Helm chart.
First off is database test flag added. This comes down to the database decomposition and ensuring that if more than one thing is configured against the same database host and port, meaning the same instance, they don't all try to run the necessary migrations. Because if you try to run migrations that are already run, it might look at you a little funny. So this is basically us making sure that you can control which one should and should not, both by default and manually if you choose to. The second one is an optional Prometheus operator service and pod monitor objects. Effectively, there is a community member who implemented chart-wide these objects that even our production currently makes use of. We're making this optional, and this will actually turn off all of the normal Prometheus metrics patterns that we use in terms of annotations on the various pods and services. So this is a full swap replacement. We have elected not to force people to have a check config option because it doesn't work right when you're doing it in template. And we actually had a problem when we looked at Flux and Argo again. So you can turn this on and it will just flip the settings of which one it produces. And if you have an existing Prometheus operator configured to consume that setup, it will pull it immediately. And then we'll tell you, hey, you probably don't need to install Prometheus because you set up the objects. Follow, you have the first set from the omnibus.
Thanks. So the one I have here is extracting the PG bouncer failover logic to a library. So previously, the entire logic was present in the failover watch script that console uses, which we could not do unit testing, or we couldn't. It was not at all extendable. So we now have it extracted to a proper Ruby class or a library that we can use for other services, not just PostgreSQL. So, and we now have unit tests for it. So, yay. That's what I have. Over to you, Robert.
All right. So the last couple of weeks, really the only major one that came in is restructure of all of our chef specs. So one of the weird things about our tests in Omnibus was that we had the code in one path set, and then the specs didn't match that code. So when you were trying to find our specs, sometimes it'd be hard to find it. They are now aligned, and we also have support for something called projectionist. So I'm not sure about other editors, but in Vim, if you have that plugin loaded, there's now a default file that you just copy in the config. And let's say you're looking at the code and you want to go look at the RSpec. You just hit :A, and it goes you right to the RSpec, opens it up. So you can go back and forth now between the code and the test that's testing it. So that's very, very useful. It was just kind of a bonus feature added in that MR. I wanted to call that out because I know a lot of us use Vim, and that is very handy. And I'll pass it over to Mitch for operator.
Yeah, no notables that need to be called out here this week, but there's lots of slightly larger MRs in the pipeline that are still in draft or in review that are going to be merged. So should have some updates coming up in the next session.
Thanks, everyone. Were there any other topics or anything anyone wanted to bring up for maintainers discussion? If not, yeah, that's the meeting for this week. We'll talk again. We'll sync again in 2 weeks. And in the meantime, we'll continue discussions over in maintainer discussion issues as well as in the maintainer discussion Slack channel for distribution. Thanks, everyone.